Okay, is my mic working? If someone could raise their hand so I know that you guys can hear me, that would be helpful. Oh, thank you guys. Okay, great. So it's action time. Man, just gotta take a deep breath. All right, so Dan Kalish here. We're gonna talk about foundational health issues and immunity and how your body really works and how your body falls apart and the things that you want to kind of focus on in the coming weeks and months as we face an unprecedented health crisis. I'm sure in 1917, 1918, people felt like this, but it's been a long time since we've felt like there is a plague sweeping the planet that kills human beings, and it is happening right now. And it's wherever you're living in the United States, it's going to not be a really great situation for quite some time. A lot of people are going to die, you know, and a lot of us are just going to get really sick and go to the hospital, and hospitals are going to be overwhelmed, and it's going to be grim. All the doctors and nurses are going to get sick. Yeah, they all are, and that's, you know, it is very much like the police force or the fire people, firemen and women jump into burning buildings. Healthcare workers are going to be, you know, doing their, you know, huge load of work in the coming weeks and months. So what I thought would be appropriate to talk about at this stage is the biggest picture that we can imagine in terms of how your body works, cellular repair, tissue breakdown, you know, and get some um, general science behind, you know, how your body works and what would be really important for all of us to think about now. So out of all these issues, number one, foundational health issue for cellular repair is around amino acids. So your body uses amino acids to build everything, to build every little bit of your immune system, to build every little bit of your mucosal or lining tissues, which we're going to talk a lot about. Your body uses amino acids to build the stress chemicals in the brain, uses amino acids to build hormones, uses amino acids to build every single thing. And so amino acids and cellular repair are where it's at in terms of the body healing as a just sort of basic and primary issue. And we get our amino acids from our food, and you can get them from plant-based protein or from animal protein, depending on which way you want to go. Plant-based proteins burn a little cleaner. Animal proteins work too. You know, they're a little more residual stuff happens when you burn up the animal proteins. But you can either be a vegan and get your protein that way, be a meat eater and get your protein that way. But amino acids are really essential. And if you're feeling like you're not getting enough cellular repair and you're worried about that, then there are specific amino acids that you can take in a supplement form to stimulate cellular repair to come back. And there's ones that you can take for all kinds of different reasons, depending on where your body needs to have cellular repair happen. But we're going to focus on now for this session is mostly on mucosal membrane tissues and how those can be repaired. And the star amino acid for mucosal tissue repair, hands down, is an amino acid called glutamine. And glutamine leads to tissue repair in the lining of the digestive tract in particular, which is where a bulk of your mucosal membrane or lining tissues are. So maybe I should just define some terms. So mucosal tissue or lining tissue would be lining of the intestinal tract, the vaginal tract, the urinary tract, the bladder, the lungs, the respiratory tract, your sinuses, right? Your nasal passageways, all these are mucosal or lining tissues in the body. And so they all are regulated and controlled by the same basic functions. There's something called mucosal immunity. So it's your immune system as it exists in the digestive tract, in the sinus passageways, in the airways, everywhere that's lining tissue or mucosal tissue in the body. The mucosal mucus, like you can think of, there's, you know, you can feel them. They have a a funny feeling to them, right? I mean, you really can't feel your large intestine, but you can imagine, you can feel the inside of your mouth, and you know that mucosal or lining tissues are coated with this stuff called secretory IgA, and that is our first line of immune defense. And so if that stuff gets weak, you're in serious trouble, and you're going to be very prone to picking up infections from viruses, bacteria, yeast, parasites, whatever's out there lurking around. If your mucosal lining is weak, it's going to get in and penetrate your tissues. So you want a strong mucosal barrier to defend yourself against virus, bacteria, parasites, yeast, any kind of organism that might be causing a problem. We're all obviously very worried about viruses now, but this is applicable to any kind of potential infection that might get into your body. Mucosal tissue is where it's at. The way I think about mucosal first line defense immune responses is like a football game, American football, right? For those of you that are Europeans, not like the soccer, but American football. So in American football, we have a really peculiar game, but we line up like 200, 300, 350-pound men, typically. It's mostly done by men. And there'd be like 5 of them lined up on one side on offense, and then there's usually a kind of skinnier guy called the quarterback that's going to hike the ball and take the ball and try to throw it or whatever, right? And then on the opposite side of them, across the line, there are usually like 4 or 5 or 6 equally huge human beings, 200, 300, 400-pound people, who are going to come in and try to crush the quarterback and take the ball. And so you hike the ball, and then these 2 massive groups of human beings like battle it out for a while. And most of the time, the quarterback survives and throws or runs or something happens, right? So imagine that you were watching an American football game, and the quarterback hiked the ball, and then the front line, the offensive line, just like fell down onto their bellies and just lay there. The defensive line would just come in and wipe out the quarterback, and it would get boring pretty quickly if every play the offensive line just dropped and the quarterback got smeared. So think about mucosal immunity or secretory IgA as your offensive line. You're the quarterback, that's you, right? And the first defense that protects you from getting smushed by these bad things out there, right? Viruses, parasites, bacteria, yeast, whatever these organisms are, is this mucosal barrier. So if your mucosal barrier is very strong, it's like a quarterback having a great front line offensive line. He's protected, or she's protected, and can throw the ball. If your frontline defense is weak, you're in serious trouble. So the regulation of mucosal immunity is conducted by a hormone called cortisol. And so this is where the plot gets kind of interesting. We'll talk a little bit about cortisol later. So number 1 point, though, is that we want to have a strong mucosal barrier. And in order to do that, we have to look at it, the mucosal barrier as a system. So what do I mean about the mucosal barrier as a system? So the mucosal barrier exists in different parts of your body. As we mentioned, you have the lining of the sinus passageways, the mouth and throat, the lining of the gut, the lining of the urinary tract. But all these mucosal tissues are linked and regulated by a hormone called cortisol. And all of them have this mucosal membrane integrity and this mucosal membrane defense called secretory IgA, and that stands for secretory immunoglobulin A. That's a technical term. So usually people call it SIgA. So SIgA is our first line barrier defense. It's that immune response that's in the very front. And if your SIgA levels are good, you can fend off bad things, viruses, bacteria, etc. If your SIgA is weak or low, you're just a walking target for every organism that is out there. So we want to keep our secretory IgA levels strong. And the really interesting thing is that even though these mucosal tissues are in different parts of the body, they're very, very strongly linked. Basic naturopathic concept that's been taught for hundreds and hundreds of years from one naturopath to another. I had the great privilege in early 1990s to learn about this from a naturopath named Dr. Bill Timmons, who died a bunch of years ago. But Bill spent years teaching me about secretory IgA and its importance. And the idea is that the bulk of mucosal membrane tissues are in and around the gut. And so if you can keep those membrane tissues really strong, it keeps the entire system very strong. And if you think about it, like if someone came in to a doctor and the patient said, I have, cold hands and cold feet, and then the doctor sent that patient to a podiatrist to get their feet checked, and then to a hand specialist to get their hands checked. That would be crazy town, right? You would think that's crazy, because we know that the hands and feet are connected, even though they're kind of far apart in your body physically, that they're connected by the circulatory system. So cold hands and cold feet means you have a circulation problem. Same thing for secretory IgA. Even though the intestinal tract lining is not super close to the nasal passageways and not super close to the urinary tract, all these mucosal membrane tissues are connected. And if we take the stress off or start to correct one area of mucosal tissue, it strengthens the whole system. And similarly, if you have a stress response and you have a lot of cortisol surging through your system, it's going to destroy or damage all the mucosal membrane tissues throughout your body. It's going to throw you into what we call a catabolic state, and you're going to start to break down tissue instead of repair. So what we're looking at is wanting to make sure that we have cellular repair. If you feel like your mucosal tissues are weak, then you want to address the stress response. But seriously, people, like, we're all stressed out of our minds right now. The idea of telling anyone to not get stressed right now when we're in the middle of watching, potentially hundreds of thousands of people starting to die is insane. So we're going to assume that we're all going to be stressed for, a little while, a year or two probably. So given that, you can do things to help reverse the stress response. There's lots of things you can do, obviously, for adrenal hormones, but we're talking today mostly about strengthening mucosal tissues. So you can strengthen mucosal tissues in your gut by taking amino acids like glutamine, and you can strengthen the mucosal tissues in your gut by avoiding foods that trigger inflammation and damage your gut. Okay, so healthy eating, and if you need it, some extra amino acids like glutamine can help you start to keep that mucosal tissue under control while you're going through this stress response. So that's a direct way you can help to strengthen your immune system. Second item here, fatty acids and cell membranes. So again, these are global concepts. Fatty acids and cell membranes are just absolutely essential to life. Every one of your cells has a membrane around it, and it is made up of different fats. And I'll show you some pictures of that later. And those fats basically are going to control what goes in and out of the cell. And the regulation of the cell membranes, absolutely mission critical to keep those healthy if you want your immune system to be healthy. We talked a lot about secretory IgA, mucosal immunity, right? And then the strength of mucosal tissues is being the key. And then this little note here about overall your body is connected, right? And so we'll talk about regulation of SIgA, but first of all, I wanted to just share with you some research studies so you can see how this all works. And this is not the most complicated thing these days. You can go onto PubMed and type in mucosal immunity, influenza, mucosal immunity, coronavirus, mucosal immunity, and viruses, and this is what people like me do when we want to learn more about a problem, is you just look in the scientific literature and see what the heck's been going on. And it's amazing. There's like tens of thousands of studies on every subject you could ever possibly imagine. You could read these, you can no human being can keep up with the scientific literature anymore, even in one narrow area. So these are just some random samplings, and I just want to read to you these studies. And as an antidote perhaps to going online and reading about how many people just died in Italy or how many people just got sick in Iran or whatever, you could go online and read about mucosal immunity and start to think about the science behind your body being healthy, and maybe how you can strengthen mucosal immunity so you can do something a little positive. So I'm just going to read from excerpts from these articles so you guys can see the kinds of things that we all should be thinking about. And then I'm going to talk later about, the punchline here, which is the things that you can do to make your mucosal immunity stronger, obviously. So here we go. And some of these words are big, but they're mostly understandable. So adaptive humoral immunity mediated by secretory antibodies, that's SIgA, appears to be desirable in the defense against mucosal virus infections. I love the way that scientists write, appears to be desirable. Yes, this stuff helps, okay? Specific secretory immunoglobulin A, SIgA, can inhibit initial pathogen colonization by performing immune exclusion both on the mucosal surface and within the selective infected secretory epithelial cells without causing tissue damage. So what they're saying there, if you want to translate that, is specific secretory IgA can inhibit, that means prevent, pathogens, that's a virus, from colonizing, that's infecting, by performing immune exclusion. It's just like kind of pushing it out, okay? So again, just a way that your body works is that if you have good secretory IgA, you can inhibit a pathogen, you can prevent an infection, right? It's another article here. Multifaceted functions of secretory IgA at mucosal surfaces. So again, what we're worried about now, and you hear this all the time, is don't touch your face, don't pick your nose. If your hands might have virus on them, you don't want to touch any mucosal or lining tissues, lining of the mouth, lining of the nasal passageways, your eyes, etc. Why? Because that's how these bugs get in, is through mucosal tissues. So again, let's look at this a little bit in more detail. I'll read from the article here. Secretory IgA plays an important role in protection and regulation of intestinal, respiratory, that's what we're worried about now, respiratory, and urogenital mucosal epithelia, that's the lining tissue, separating the outside environment from the inside of the body. This primary function of SIgA is referred to as immune exclusion, a process that limits the access of microorganisms and mucosal antigens to these thin and vulnerable mucosal barriers. SIgA has been shown to be involved in avoiding opportunistic pathogens from entering and disseminating in the system, right? So they're basically, again, saying the same thing. SIgA helps keep the bad guys out. Here's another article. And really, we could do this all day long. I just want to read, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these to you and kind of get the point. And we all have Google available. You guys can all do this kind of research on your own as well. Interference of coronavirus infection by production of immunoglobulin G or IgA. Virus neutralizing antibodies. Doesn't that sound like a really good thing? A virus neutralizing antibody. Immunoglobulin gene fragments, and this is like too complicated. Let's not read that one, but the title is enough, right? You get the point. Interference, a blocking of the coronavirus infection by, and this is not the current one, obviously this is an old article, but coronaviruses in general, by expression of immunoglobulin G or IgA. Okay, and later on in a moment, we'll talk about how you can strengthen your IgA. I just want you to get the point about why this is so critical. Last thing here, functional maturation of nasal mucosa. You want your nasal mucosa, the lining tissues in here, to be super strong so you can resist any kind of exposure. Role of secretory immunoglobulin A. Secretory IgA plays an important role in defending the mucous membranes of the upper respiratory airways from common infections. All right, and that is where we're starting. So point is, probably got now, we want to keep the mucosal lining tissues strong. What are those lining tissues made out of? They're made out of amino acids that are converted into proteins. And so there's all kinds of different proteins. There's blood proteins, there's bone proteins, there's gut lining proteins, which we've already talked about. I mean, gut lining proteins that are assembled into gut lining tissue, right? And then there's something called GALT, which is very important for pathogen protection. Okay? But what's interesting about all these proteins that are so important throughout the body, and this is some cool stuff, is your body takes amino acids and it kind of mushes them together and it forms these ribbony looking structure things that are proteins. It's kind of a miracle that any of this stuff can even work at all when you think about how complicated your body is. But the cool thing about all these different proteins is they're made, and this is crazy town, is they're made from about the same kind of combinations of amino acids, all right? About the same kind of combinations of amino acids are responsible for producing all human proteins. They're very, very, very similar. Okay, and here's a list. You can just Google this, like what are the essential amino acids that make proteins? Okay. So we just want to get enough of these amino acids so we can make these proteins so we can protect ourselves, right? And that's, again, just through healthy food, plant-based proteins or animal-based proteins. So that's one item to keep, the structure and integrity of your body healthy. The other, I think it's worth knowing a little bit about, are the cell membranes themselves. So this is a picture of a cell membrane, and these little things, these little doohickeys here, and they have like a little round thing and then the little leggy thing sticking out. Those are fats, okay? And these fats line up, it's kind of in a cool way here, to make this membrane. And the integrity and strength of this membrane is really important because this membrane keeps things out that are bad and lets things in that are good. So you want healthy cell membranes, right? And you want healthy amounts of amino acids so you can build all these tissues and repair everything. So we get these things from food, which is, brilliant. And these are the reasons why right now in particular, you want to eat really good quality healthy fats. And there's two general categories because these fats are going to go into your cell membranes, right? There's omega-3s and omega-6s. You can eat both. And omega-3s are a little more famous. They're the ones from fish oil. If you're vegan or vegetarian, you can get them from flax and walnut and chia and hemp. I have every morning a smoothie, well, almost every morning, a smoothie with flax, chia, and hemp. How hard is that? I don't know. It tastes really good. Mix some fruit in there, and it's kind of easy way to get all your omega-3s. If you want to eat fish, go for it. You can do that. And then on the omega-6 side, you need some of these also. That's going to come from things like nuts and seeds. Okay, and these healthy fats are going to lead to healthy cell membranes, which is going to keep you protected. And then what you don't want to have happen, especially in regards to proteins, we talked about proteins, right? So again, you eat proteins from your diet, your body breaks these down into amino acids, and then you use these amino acids to assemble all the things that we're talking about now to protect your body. If you're in catabolic physiology, what that means is that you're breaking down tissues instead of building them up. And we do not want to be catabolic right now. We all want to be anabolic or in a building up and healing and repair state for the next little while, because that's how, that's what basically keeps us healthy. So catabolic physiology means you're breaking down things and you're going to break down proteins and use those proteins and amino acids for fuel. And the more that you use them for fuel, the less that you can use them for repair. And that is a problem. Okay, so you don't want to go through what we call catabolic physiology or breakdown physiology. And breakdown physiology or catabolic physiology happens when we're really stressed. So we have to be a little careful and calm ourselves down. Death, divorce, childbirth. I mean, we're going through something that we've never seen before, which is death of thousands of people in every country in the world, and there's not from a war, right? This is very much, I think, like World War II, where, gosh, I don't know, 5-6 million Germans died. I think 20 to 30 million Russians died. The Americans lost, I don't know, how many did we lose? 500,000, maybe? I can't remember now. We lost a fair number of people too, the Japanese lost, so we're talking about just death on a pretty massive scale, stresses human beings out, and that throws us into a stress response where we start to become catabolic. And that breakdown state or catabolic state immediately weakens your mucosal immunity. Now you have a decreased immune response, and that's going to start to damage your gut lining and make you more prone to picking up an infection. So we want to be, as much as possible, given the circumstances, in an anabolic or building up state. And one of the ways that you can be anabolic is by supporting your adrenal hormones, okay, and your stress response. And by eating really well, by trying to meditate if you can, by exercising as much as is possible, by getting as much rest as you can, because that'll put you into a more anabolic or building up state where you can go through cellular repair. In every moment that we're stressed out of our minds, we're going to be more catabolic and tend to break down tissues more and tend to be, weaken ourselves in a sense and weaken our immune system. So when we're stressed, this hormone called cortisol surges. These other compounds that are sort of neurochemicals, neurohormones called catecholamines start to surge, get this adrenaline rush, and that throws us into a catabolic state, and that's what we want to be careful of. Okay? And if this goes on for long enough, we get stuck in this catabolic state, and then we start to break down tissues for a really long time. And the way to actually repair all this is the simple stuff. It's exercising as much as you possibly can. It's eating as well as you possibly can. It's getting enough rest and kind of following the natural rhythms of life as much as you possibly can, and trying to avoid the things that are freaking all of us out right now, in a really negative way, okay? And then on the stress side, there's stress physiology with all these hormones and all kinds of bad things start to happen in different categories and stresses and stuff. And if you want to have, in my practice in general, I do lab testing, and we measure cortisol, we measure DHEA, we measure the stress response, we measure all the things to do with immunity, and then we fix things based on lab-based programs. So it's great if you have the time and money and you can afford to see someone like me, sign up right now. We have openings. We can do that. Now, if that's not realistic for you, there's some things you can do off the cuff. And I don't usually recommend this, but we're in extraordinary times right now. And so you may not be able to get and see someone, you might not be able to afford it, but there's a couple things you can do that will strengthen your immune response. And just do a self-check. If you can't afford to do the lab work with me, just do a self-check and go inside and ask yourself, am I stressed? If the answer is yes, then you can do this program, okay? And you can take something called dehydroepiandrosterone. Took me like seriously an hour to learn how to pronounce that word, dehydroepiandrosterone. I don't know. That was like 30 years ago. I spent a long time. Anyways, it's DHEA is the name. That's the fancy name is dehydroepiandrosterone, but the real name is DHEA. DHEA. It's a supplement. You can buy it anywhere. I like it in the liquid form. You can buy it in pills. And DHEA is a very powerful, stimulus or beneficial immune support. And it's especially helpful as an immune support when the person is stressed. Don't take a lot of it because it's a hormone, and if you're not doing the testing, be careful. But you can, if you're stressed, you can for sure take 25 milligrams of DHEA every day. Probably could get away with 50, but that's pushing your luck a little bit, as a way to really counteract the immune degradation and damage that happens from stress. So they say 25 milligrams a day, 50 if you want to push your luck a little bit without testing on DHEA is fine. And very, very effective way to help the immune response when you're under stress, right? And then the other way to do that also, and you can take these two things together, is a supplement called Pregnenolone. No one can really pronounce Pregnenolone. It's about as hard to say as dehydroepiandrosterone, so we just call it Preg. So Preg helps a lot when you're stressed. It is also a hormone, so don't take a ton of it. But if you're under a lot of stress, you can't afford to see a doctor like me right now, then you can go ahead and do Pregnenolone. So like, if we're gonna be conservative, let's say 50 milligrams a day, for sure you can handle without a lab test. And 100 is kind of pushing it a little bit. You get away with that, but definitely never any more than 100. So if I were you, I would do 25 milligrams of the DHEA, 50 milligrams of the Pregnenolone. Contraindications to doing this would be if you have a history of breast cancer, if you have a strong family history of breast cancer, you probably don't want to take any kind of hormone, right? Men with prostate cancer, they argue about if you want to be extra careful. If you have a history of prostate cancer, you probably don't want to take it. The older that you are, the lower that your DHEA levels go. So anyone that's, over 20 years old, your DHEA is declining every decade. So the older that you are, probably the more that you need it. But any age, you can take these products. I would not take them if you were under, let's say, 18 years of age. You don't want to give kids hormones, so it's kind of a little risky. And again, DHEA and Pregnenolone, you can buy them in every health food store. You can buy them from me. You can buy them, get a good quality brand, either a capsule or a liquid, and they can be really effective. They also, and I've been using these products based on labs for almost 30 years. They're really kind of calming when you're stressed out of your mind. They usually help people handle stress better. They make you, yell at your spouse a little bit less, or yell at your kids a little bit less. So they have a modulating effect on how you're feeling as well, especially when there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And one of the important things about them is that they help reverse that catabolic state, right? They help reverse that catabolic state that we're concerned about here, okay? The other obvious things you can do would be magnesium and some kind of multi to go along with that, right? And most of the time we take these in the morning. So now, let me pause for a commercial break here. I'm supposed to have a slide that promotes my phone practice, but I don't even forgot to pull it up. Sorry, it's been a crazy day. I've been working pretty hard all day, and I didn't have time to really properly prepare for today. Sorry for this talk. Yeah, here we go. Marketing slides. See, I have the best staff, by the way. If you ever do sign up at my clinic, I work all on the phone, and we have a really good team of people that support me here. I'm very privileged. Let's see what they came up with. This is what I'm supposed to be talking about. Oh yeah, here we go. Kalish Wellness is accepting new clients. Book a free consult with our health coach to assess if you're a good candidate. Visit kalishwellness.com and click start here. Yeah, so you can do a free consult with our health coach. Tell her what all your problems are and see if you think you might be a good fit for us, okay? So that's our commercial announcement. Now let's go back to our regularly scheduled programming. So I wanted to talk about one more thing. I don't have a really great slide for it, so we're just gonna have to wing it. Let's just go back to the original slide. Here. So summary of the main points. There's a few body processes that are absolutely essential for us to be in a repair place. And when you're under stress and you're worried about getting sick, you want to have a lot of cellular repair going on. You don't want to be in a catabolic state where there's tissue breakdown and things are starting to fall apart. So you want to support your body with amino acids so you can engage in cellular repair, either in a supplement form or from food. You want to support your body with fatty acids to keep the cell membranes really strong, either from your food or from supplements. Fatty acid supplements are typically the omega-3 fish oils. Those are the most commonly used. You want to, for sure, strengthen your secretory IgA and your mucosal immunity to build up the strength of these lining tissues. We looked at all these research studies here, right? The role of mucosal immunity in influenza. Mucosal immunity helps prevent the flu. Mucosal immunity and viral infections. It's been shown to be related to preventing viral infections. Multifaceted functions of secretory IgA at mucosal surfaces. Remember, it helps protect against numerous different microorganisms, according to that study. Interference specifically with the coronavirus. This is from 1997, not the new coronavirus. The new coronavirus is like a couple months old. But in general, with coronaviruses, secretory IgA is effective at reducing risk of infection. And again, mucosal tissues in the nasal passageways, in the respiratory tract, all these things tied back to the idea of strong secretory IgA. And stress weakens it because it makes us catabolic and we start to break down things, and cortisol regulates mucosal immunity. So if cortisol is out of balance because you're stressed, mucosal immunity is going to take a hit. So one of the solutions for that would be DHEA and Pregnenolone to help strengthen your mucosal immunity. 25 milligrams of DHEA a day, I think, is safe to take if you don't have any lab work. 50 milligrams of Pregnenolone is safe to take if you don't have any lab work, but don't take them if you have a history of a hormone-related cancer, and don't take them if you're like under the age of 18. It's more for adults. They are hormones, but they're very powerful, especially when we're under this kind of stress. If you have the time and money to talk to someone like me on the phone, then you do the lab work. If not, this is a way you can get by for a little while. I'm going to stop right here, and we're going to have a series of these talks coming up. The next one I'm going to cover is on the microbiome and how you can strengthen the immune response in the gut to help your overall immune response. We're also going to start something called Facebook Live. I'm a little old. I have been very inconsistent with Facebook. However, we are determined now, because of the extraordinary times, to start to really get into Facebook so we can reach more people. So you'll be seeing a lot of stuff about all the free offerings I have on Facebook. So if you're not a Facebook friend of us or whatever, you can go check out the Kalish Institute Facebook page and get signed up there, and you'll get access to all the things that we're going to be doing in the coming weeks. And then we're going to have a regular series of these at least twice a week, plus all the Facebook posts and everything to try to keep up to date and in tune with all the changes that are going on. So I hope you guys have a calm evening and can spend some time with your loved ones. I'll tell you one thing that's been the best thing that's happened so far in terms of the virus outbreak is that I talk to my sisters every day, not every day, but almost every day. And one of them lives in Dubai, right? So, and I'm talking to my mother every day, and my sister's talking to my other sister, and we all love each other. And, you say, I love you on the phone. You didn't always used to say that. And so there is sort of a sense of coming together, I think, that's happening from this, hopefully. My son even picks up the phone when I call him now. My college-age son, every time I call, he's like, Dad, So anyways, I hope that you can reach out and have connections with your family and loved ones now to help us get through all this. All right, we'll talk again soon. Thank you.